It's no great secret that RollerCoaster Tycoon 2's scenarios were a little disappointing compared to the first game. And the knowledge that the expansions were disappointing is so unsecret I half expect it's shown on the billboards at Piccadilly Circus every other Thursday. Now, in modern times, some internet fool would make a 52-minute video about those things, and that would be that. But how did they approach this problem in the distant past of 2003? RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 had been designed from the start with the ability to add more in-game objects, including bundling them into scenarios as with the downloadable Panda World scenario, which featured these unique panda statues and coaster train. Now, this was ostensibly so that Infogrames/Atari would be able to fire out expansion packs without bothering the notoriously reclusive Chris Sawyer for help with assembly language. But the RollerCoaster Tycoon community started to wonder whether they could also create their own object data files, a wondering that intensified after Infotari plopped out Wacky Worlds, which provided not so much in the way of gameplay or new features, but a lot in the way of examples of adding new object files to the game. Into this world of 2003 came James Hughes' object editor. This allowed loading an object data file, changing some of the bitmaps and properties contained within it, and saving them as a new object, which could be imported into the game. At first, the prevailing view was that fans would be able to create new static scenery objects and maybe replace some of the rides that were only a single static sprite, like the Crooked House, but that replacing every frame of a complex animated ride like the Twist would be beyond the capabilities of a hobbyist creator, and of course, without access to the game code, adding any new types of ride would be right out. This, combined with the limitations of those early editors, led to the creation of what were called sim rides, animated scenery items which looked like rides, but guests would never queue for them, and of course you wouldn't get the benefit of an actual ride, like income, or an increase to the number of guests who can be in your park before guest generation slows down. Of course, with the RollerCoaster Tycoon community being more about having fun and building a pleasing park than enforcing mandatory hyper-optimized gameplay, these sim rides were still fairly popular. Then, at the start of August 2003, The Swinger was released. I'll keep your pampas grass jokes to yourself, lovers of risque 70s comedy, but I'm not leaving this a totally comedy-free zone. This ride was a collaboration between comedian Dan Wolfe, who used his alter ego from the stage, the Amazing Earl, to post on RCT forums, and programmer and role-playing game designer Buggy. It was, if the web's patchily preserved history is to be believed, the first community-made real ride to be made for RCT2, one which guests could pay for and board, even if their sprites would disappear every once in a while. And let me point out, this is a beautiful example of the early internet. Dan/Earl may not have been the most famous comedian, and it's not like he routinely turns up on panel shows, suspiciously produced by the same parent company that just so happens to own his talent agency. Coincidence, honest. But this is his professional website from 2003, and it's like, hey, I also love RollerCoaster Tycoon. Imagine if you went to Taylor Swift's website now, and at the bottom below all the adverts for her latest LP was a box saying, and guess what? I just can't get enough of Euro Truck Simulator 2, and I've made several add-on trucks for it. Download them here. More sprite-swapped custom rides followed, replacing the go-karts with motorbikes, an improved version of the Swinger that didn't make the guests temporarily invisible, and the classic Fairground Superloop. Of course, the rides available to the player in each RollerCoaster Tycoon scenario are fixed, defined at the point the scenario is created. If you wanted to use any of these rides, you'd need to create your own scenario, or download one with them included. Perhaps not the biggest problem, since, as covered at length on this very channel, if you wanted to enjoy RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 to its full potential, you needed to be doing one or both of these things. Oh, speaking of wasted potential, the first expansion pack Wacky Worlds had come out in May 2003, and not to give too much away about its reception, but Within a month of release, RCT2 fan sites were running polls to ask their readers if Atari should refund in full anybody who had mistakenly purchased the expansion thinking it was good. But even before this, some members of the community had considered that both the tools built into the game and the tools built around it could be used to provide something more than one-off scenarios. Indeed, that the community itself was not exploring what was possible in terms of providing a compelling gameplay experience using the scenario editor, preferring to show off already completed megaparks or giant sandboxes for creating them. As far back as February 2003, a small group had put together a storyline for a set of linked scenarios, based on the idea that the player was in charge of a time machine, which would take them back both to ordinary scenarios like completing a historical theme park, and also to fantastic ones set in prehistoric times or the far future, which may sound oddly familiar in terms of RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 expansions, but at this point Time Twister would most likely have been little more than a line on an accountant's spreadsheet titled RCT2 Expansion Pack 2? This time-travelling idea accumulated members, scenarios and custom objects as it became the user-created expansion set, or UCES. In the wake of Wacky Worlds, the need for an actually good expansion became obvious. Bear in mind that in 2003, this was quite the coordination effort. Some members talk of working mostly offline and submitting their creations via a dial-up internet connection. Thankfully, RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 files were small enough for this to be manageable, although you might still be looking at 10 minutes to upload a large ride file, or scenario, even after it was compressed. Keeping communication going in this bandwidth-constrained asynchronous time was that must-have item for any early 2000s web community, a PHP-based forum. In this case, InVision Powerboard. Sadly, the private nature of that forum means most of what got said is lost to history, although ex-members mention one big, important and rather fractious and argumentative discussion as UCES neared completion. With so many scenarios, objects and ride files needing to be put in the correct place, should the project have its own installer? The for side prevailed on that particular argument, although if you were on the against side, I will say you have been at least partly vindicated by time, since that very installer made it a bit of a pain to get everything running nicely on OpenRCT2. UCES started to look like a viable product toward the end of September 2003, with the team tidying up the last few loose ends and claiming a release date of soon, with many exclamation marks. And if you were wondering why I started this video with a lengthy diversion about the Amazing Earl's custom rides and was careful to mention that these started to be released from August of that year, well, it was just the first thing I happened to pay attention to. I'm really not that organised. Which is a shame, because if I were the kind of person who didn't write YouTube scripts in a massive stream of consciousness, I could point out that the user-created expansion set contained an exclusive Amazing Earl ride, Caveman Cars, which he proudly mentioned on his own website after the release of UCES, together with another wonderful bit of 2003 internet, a warning that the download is a whole 14 megabytes. These days, my laptop thinks that's an acceptable amount of data to slurp down the pipes if I click the Start menu a bit funny. Speaking of releases, with things wrapping up at the end of September, the UCES team decided the ideal release date would be October the 15th, 2003, serving as a first birthday present to RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, the game having been released in North America exactly 1 year before. UCES also contained another present. In addition to the main Time Machine set of scenarios, it included a further 7 scenarios, following a storyline called Katie's Dreamworld. This is all fine, as far as the history goes, but I'm sure you'd love to know, how does it play? Importing the files into a recent version of OpenRCT2 gives a nice touch before you've even started the game, by putting all the scenarios in their own tab, grouping them according to whether they belong to the Time Machine or Katie's Dreamworld, and even putting them in the correct order. As you might reasonably expect, some of the custom scenery and shops look a little homemade, and there's the occasional custom ride which is obviously a repurposed scenery object from the base game. This is fine. Putting these against Simon Foster's original artwork, you're comparing work done by hobbyists in their own time for free against a professional artist who'd built up a custom rendering and sprite production pipeline over years working with Chris Saywer. And the average standard is still higher than the Frontier expansion packs, and people were paid to make those. Besides, if you're playing a 20-year-old isometric game whose graphics were considered dated even when it was released, surely it's all about the gameplay. And in terms of that gameplay, difficulty-wise, the Time Machine is pitched much more like an expansion than, well, the expansions. The scenarios are satisfyingly big, with goals that take a while to achieve. You're not going to have a situation like Schneider Shores, where you've just gotten going thinking, I'm looking forward to seeing how this park turns out, only for the windscreen to pop up. Unless you've got a rather better attention span than I have. And there's some genuinely nice scenery work going on in some of these too. Rocky Mountain Miners is an absolutely incredible piece of work, being both huge and intricately detailed. The Roman town in Urbis Incognitas is an impressive set piece, but also shows something UCES does so much better than either of the official expansions. While there are impressive set pieces, they don't dominate the map to the point there's nowhere left for you to build. You have the opportunity to build around them and incorporate them into your park. If I had a slight gripe, it's that I'd have liked more scenarios like Luna Park, with the central theme of the Time Machine being, well, having a time machine. It's a bit of a shame you don't get to interfere in the development of more classic parks from history, particularly because Luna Park is so well made. I love the amount of work which went into the central area, and this Shoot the Chutes ride. And some of the ideas don't quite land for me. They're creative, but the end result is still playing through a large flat park with a couple of centerpieces that serve mainly to get in the way and give the camera rotation button an unreasonable amount of service. Katie's Dreamworld in particular suffers from some scenarios which are little more than a single gimmick, although this is a slightly churlish point to raise when it was only positioned as an add-on bonus to the main set, and also all of this was free. Which is perhaps the point. The RollerCoaster Tycoon community of 2003 responded to the small collection of good base game scenarios and disappointing first expansion pack by creating something which compares favourably against those same official expansion packs that Atari expected you to pay actual money for, that you had earned. And they're certainly better balanced, offer more satisfying gameplay, and while some of those custom objects may be a little wonky, are nowhere near as eyeball-searingly awful to look at as the worst of the Frontier packs. I'll put it this way, I didn't start any of these scenarios by deleting all the scenery objects because I couldn't bear seeing them for so much as another minute. Is it an essential download 2 decades later when you can open up RCT Go and pick your pick from hundreds of pages of scenarios with a handy thumbnail letting you skip any of the ones which look like gimmicks or dull, flat expanses? Of course not. But it's an interesting curio, and even today the average standard of these scenarios is high, and they're still good fun to play through, even without the historical aspect. And while they might not be as exciting as an RMC hybrid, the custom rides are fascinating to see what could be done, without access to the code and merely a few tools based on reverse engineering the object format. If nothing else, it will keep you busy until Taylor Swift releases her Leyland Super Comet and 1950s trailer megapack for Euro Truck Simulator 2. You've got loads of tape. Stop worrying about tape. You've got like 1 million tape. At least 7 tape. Some number between 1 million and 7. No units, just tape. Actually, there are probably at least 7 tapes in this house. There we go. If this fails, I can just gaffer tape it. That's fine. It's all one take. It's fine. Nobody cares. It's just for YouTube. All people want to do is just see the games. This is it. Is there anything good we can copy? Like, is there anything I could actually just copy wholesale from this? Like, find some obscure YouTube channel, right, who makes really good stuff and just re-record it. Just steal it all. You know that you're physically incapable of being that dishonourable. It's not going to work. You would just apologise constantly. It's like, sorry, I copied this. No.